Right, okay, so I am going to start with sharing my screen and then discussing what is going to be our next approach, which is going to be biological. So I'm just going to overview all that we've done till now. So the syllabus for psychology, the AS level syllabus for psychology has four different approaches, and that is something that we know by now. But there's social, learning, cognitive, and biological. So I have sent I have sent so sorry I we have already covered social, learning, and cognitive, and the cognitive was the last one that we were covering where we did Puzulu, and now we're going to start the biological. So essentially we covered everything that was to do with, let's say, society, because that was social. We covered everything that was to do with the individual, because that was learning. We covered everything that is to do with the brain, because brain, feelings, emotions, memories, because that's cognitive. Now we're going to do everything that is to do with body, okay? And that doesn't necessarily have to be human body, it could be an animal's body as well. Just generally biology, um, as bio as a subject is all biological features for every biological being. Now that could be human being or just an animal itself. So main assumptions of the biological approach. So when we're starting with the biological approach, there's two things that we consistently need to remember. Another thing is that these are the kind of questions that come. So that is why in the bracket over here, if you can see, they've written Cambridge International 2021. Why? So essentially what happens is they ask you, please explain the two assumptions of the biological approach, and that's a four marker. So this usually comes in your paper one, and this is like a general question that they usually ask. So the main assumptions are: number one, behavior, cognitions, and emotions can be explained in terms of working of the brain and effect of hormones, genetics, and evolution. So one thing that they're saying is that a human's behavior, that a human's cognitions, and a human's emotions can be explained in terms of the way that brain works, in terms of the way that body works, in terms of the way that hormones work, in terms of the way that your genes work, right? Genes are everything that's passed down, hormones are inside the body that basically help the body function, and also the your behavior, your cognition, your emotion, all of these things can also be explained by the fact of evolution. Evolution is how human beings have formulated, right? The number two thing that they're saying over here is similarities and differences between people can be understood in terms of biological factors and their interaction with other factors. So what they're saying here is that when you want to understand the similarities and differences between different people, what you can look at is biological factors. That is the number one thing that you should essentially also look at, right? So if you want to look at the differences between, let's say, you and I, or my sister and me, right? So obviously biological features will be the first thing to look at. So my obviously, let's say for example, if someone's trying to figure out the differences between my sister and I, so they will say, okay, they both have different noses. Even that would be a biological feature, right? This is the brain structure that they've shown us here. We call it the central nervous system. We're going to look at the workings of the brain, and then obviously understand a little bit about the brain, because even the first study that we're going to be doing, which is called Dement and Kleitman, that is about sleep. And sleep is very, very, very much directly related to your brain activity, even though we don't know much about it, but that is what it is. Make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So, the workings of the brain, together with the spinal cord, the brain is the part of the central nervous system which controls all our bodily functions and thoughts, both conscious and unconscious. The human brain is a highly complex organ made up of billions of neurons which work together in in sorry which work together in specialized neural networks. In this chapter, you will learn about the localization of function, which refers to the idea that specific structures in the brain are responsible for specific behaviors and processes. You will also learn that experience can cause changes in neural networks, including increasing and decreasing the number of connections between neurons. This process is called neuroplasticity and is a good example of an interaction between nature versus nurture. Through this course, you will also learn about various brain structures, some of which are subcortical structures. This means that they are buried deep within the brain below the outside layer called the cortex. The brain is also divided into five areas or lobes, which each of which have been linked to different areas of human functioning. For example, visual is the occipital lobe and auditory is the temporal lobe. Now, I know it sounds like a lot of things and it sounds very complex, but it's not. We're going to make it very, very, very simple. Okay. So, one thing that you need to know is that with the brain that they've shown us over here, now each part of this brain has different functions. That is exactly what they're trying to tell you. Okay. Each of the, so essentially what happens is your body functions because of your brain, and your brain functions through all of these parts. So it's not just that, oh my god, I have a brain and my brain is functioning for everything. No. So let's say I have a brain within which I have an amygdala. Amygdala is responsible for my memory, right? Then let's say I have a brain which has a cerebellum. Cerebellum is responsible for my thoughts and processes, right? So basically, essentially, they're going to talk about all the areas, all the parts of the brain, and they're going to explain how what each is responsible for. So like for example, in our body we know that our hands are responsible sorry. Right, so in our body we know that our hands are responsible for one thing, whereas our legs are responsible for the completely different thing, right? Sorry. Right, so that is essentially what's happening with the brain as well, because the brain is divided into so many parts. Each part has a different function. Okay, now the brain is also made up of a lot of neurons, right? Neurons are basically like your nerve cells, right? The brain is the area where there's going to be a lot of neurons. Now why is that? Because all the nerves are starting from the brain. Okay, and these veins and these nerves are throughout your body, right? So this all, they are centering at the brain, they're all joined at the brain, they all come from the brain, and then from the brain they go to every single part of your body, right? So that is why they say that it is the center of the body as well, in the sense that all the nerve cells are attached over here, hence there is a lot of neurons in your brain. Okay, so that is one thing, but that's literally it, right? Now they were talking about the fact that you have different, the brain is divided into five different parts, right? And that those different parts are basically the ones that have different functions, right? So they are called brain structures, right? And these brain structures, within these brain structures you've got five different lobes. Okay, brain structure in the sense that how is your brain structured, right? What's big, what's small, whatever, right? And these brain structures include the five different lobes. Okay, and each lobe has a different sense. Okay, so one lobe, which is the occipital lobe, it takes care of the visual sense, which means it takes care of our eyes, whatever we're looking at, however we're evaluating whatever we're looking at, all of those things are the responsibility of the occipital lobe. Then we also have temporal lobe, which is looking at the responsibility of everything that we're hearing. It has the auditory responsibility, right? So essentially you're going to know about more about for the three more of these lobes, right? So till now, what do we know? That there's a lot of neurons in the brain because it is the center of the nervous system. It is the center of the central nervous system, and that is why, again, we know a lot about the brain, right? That's one thing. Then we move on, then we understand that every the brain has different parts and every part has its own function, right? Then we move on, we understand that brain structures, there is a thing called brain structures, and that all in itself also talks about temporal lobes, sorry, general lobes, right? Out of which there's five different lobes. And then now we know the name of two, which is occipital and temporal. We will know the name of three more. Clear till here?
Yes, yes.
Amazing. Now we have the effect of hormones. Now, why are we looking at the effect of hormones and why are we looking at the effect of the brain? This is because obviously these are the things that will affect our body, and everything that affects our body will come under the biological approach, right? So, the effect of hormones, in order to understand this, we need to know a little bit about the endocrine system, right? So, the endocrine system is made of glands throughout the body which produce and release various substances, including hormones. Hormones are sometimes called chemical messengers as they travel through the blood to the various bodily organs. Hormones bind messengers as they travel through the blood. Sorry, hormones bind to specially shaped receptors signaling the organs to bring about important changes to help the organism to develop and respond to their environment. The most important gland in this body is called the pit- pituitary. Such a different difficult name for me to pronounce as well, but it's pituitary gland and it is situated in the brain. This gland controls the release of the hormones from all other glands of the body. For example, the adrenal corticotropic hormone. This is actually when you're excited. Hormone is released when the pituitary um, gland and signals the adrenal gland at the top of the kidneys to release the stress hormone called cortisol. Right. So essentially, what they're telling us over here is, so we have an endocrine system, right? So like right now, we just learned that we had a central nervous system, and the main part of our central nervous system was the brain itself, right? Now we know that we also have a endocrine system. Now, what is this endocrine system? Endocrine system is basically saying, so the nervous system was taking care of all nerves in the body, right? But the endocrine system takes care of all. Uh, let's say glands in the body. Okay, so it takes takes care of all the substances in the body, right? So all different types of every different type of substance that is in the body, that is a part of the body, that is being taken care in this endocrine system, right? So we essentially are looking at within these substance, we have one substance which is the hormone, right? So hormone is basically, they're these chemical messengers. Okay, they're chemically produced, and what they do is that they receive information from receptors. So let's say, for example, the brain has a receptor, and that receptor goes to the hand, and it tells the hand to, like, it's receive, the hand is receiving this receptor. But what, so there's hormones which will receive this receptor, which will take the news. So these are the ones that will listen to the receptor, and they will take the news, and then they will start acting accordingly, right? So for example, what happens is, essentially, like, let's say, for if we've been through something really really bad, or something really shocking, right? So what happens is, our brain sends receptors to our body that something shocking has happened. So it is the hormones that actually receive these receptors. Hormones listen to these receptors, and then hormones basically make the human act that way. And then we actually become sad, or we become distressed, or we become shocked because of our hormones. And then people even say that, okay, yeah, it's her hormones, she's acting in this way because it's her hormones, right? They're acting out. So there are instances where our hormones start acting out, right? They get too much information, they receive too much information, they listen to the receptors, and they start acting out in a certain way. So these are the chemical messengers. They receive information, and they act in a certain way. And every single part of the body has its own set of hormones, right? But they've told us that the most important one is the pituitary, right? Because it is situated in the brain, it is right in the brain, and it controls all other hormones, right? It is controlling all other glands. It is controlling every single gland that is there in the body, and whatever chemical that those glands are about to receive, pituitary is actually controlling that. Hence it is the most important. Are we clear till here?
Yes, I.
Okay, great. Now we have the effect of genetics, okay, which is genes, right? So genes is basically all the DNA that you get from your parents, and they are responsible for transmitting specific characteristics from one generation to the next, from parents to the children. Genes are stretches of DNA, large chains of molecules that code the creation of amino acids, which make up all the proteins needed to create a living organism. When psychologists talk about genetics, they are referring to the branch of biology that is concerned with the effect of genes on not only our physical development, but also our behavior and mental processing. It is also important to understand the way that genes are expressed, that is, the way that the instructions are carried out, is affected by environmental factors such as stress and diet. These interactions between nature and nurture are called epigenetic effects. So basically, what they're saying here is, number one, what you need to understand is that genes are everything that's hereditary, right? Everything that you've brought on from your parents or your grandparents, etc., etc. So it's like a chain of DNA that is passed down, right? And this chain of DNA essentially controls or creates our amino acids. And amino acids is basically all the chemicals that we need in order to stay healthy, stay alive, which is like includes protein as well, right? um When you talk about genes, they also say that genes also affect other factors. So it's not just your body that it will affect, but it will also affect environmental factors. Genes will also determine how much stress you take. So all of these, it's like characteristics that your parents might have, that you might also have, just because you have that particular set of DNA passed down by them. So that is why we need to understand genes, because if a person is acting a certain way, or their body is acting a certain way, it is very much possible that it's because of their genetics. Clear till here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then we have the effect of evolution. So, evolution refers to the biological process whereby the characteristics of a species gradually change over several generations. This relies on the process of natural selection. Genes which code for characteristics associated with survival become more common, and genes that decrease the chance of survival become less common. Biological psychologists believe that behavioral differences between species depend on the amount of shared DNA, etc., etc. So essentially, evolution is how human beings have been developed over several years and so many generations. How has that led to human beings being developed? So essentially, that is what you're looking at when you look at genes, when you look at evolution, right? That's one thing. And another thing is that they're saying that when you look at evolution, you also have to hand in hand look at DNA, right? So even when you're moving ahead and you are developing, your DNA is the one thing that will still stay the same part of you. That's just a general idea. Understanding similarities and differences between people. Similarities between people can be explained in terms of the fact that human brains typically include same brain structures, which is localized to specific behaviors and skills. Likewise, hormones typically have the same. So they're saying for similarities, you should know that brain has the same structure for everybody, almost everybody. Hormones usually have the same effect on most people, like in behavior and cognition. You will learn that NREM and REM stages of sleep is something that everybody has. So there's two stages of sleep. There's REM stage and there's NREM stage. I'll explain later because that's the first study. So everybody has that. So these are all similarities between people. Atypical brain development or brain damage may lead to differences. Now they're talking about differences. So differences could be how your brain is mapped. Okay, where is the location of certain areas in your brain? That is something that can be changed, right? That's a gray matter. You will your interactions, okay, your behavior, that is all different. Even if even if your biological sex is same, let's say you're both female or whatever, your social factors will be different, all of those things. um Methodology and biological approach. So biological psychologists generally collect quantitative data. They usually have experiments, they have very objective measures, because when you're looking at biological data, you will require that sort of machinery, and because of that, that's very objective as well. So for example, when you're looking at brain, right, so you will require an ECG machine, right? So or an EEG machine, right? So because you're using a machine, and that is why essentially the data is very valid, goes without saying, right? And then you have fMRI, MRI, because when you're studying brain structure, or when you're studying electrical activity, you need all of this machinery. So again, it gets very objective, it's very quantitative, and yeah, it's bias free. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I want you to just actually, this is something. So they're just telling us a little bit about the history of biological approach, right? So back in 1980, where the first study took place by Beck, and then it kept growing. And right now, when we look at this, so we'll be looking at Dement and Gleitman, we'll be looking at Hassett, and we'll be looking at Olzel, right? So it's very distinctive. They're very different from each other. So when you look at Dement and Gleitman, right, they'll be using an EEG to look at sleep, right? So it's all about sleep and dreams. But when you look at Hassett, that's about a monkey toy. That's like a monkey toy. And when you look at Olzel, that's mindfulness and brain scans. But again, in this as well, we'll use fMRI. There were two other studies. So essentially, before the syllabus changed, there used to be Dependent Gleitman, Conley, and Schachter and Singer. But they've removed two of those studies and they've added on two new ones. Dement and Gleitman is still the same one. Right. So that's that. Right, that's the first study. We're gonna start in 2 minutes. I'm just getting myself some water.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. So, a little bit about William Dement and Nathaniel Gleitman. Um, one second. Right. Um, so they were from the University of Chicago. They were the founders of modern sleep. They're telling a little bit about their daughters, generally telling all the things that they've studied, where they started with family, started studying family, knowing about a little bit about sleep, etc., etc. Right. So these are the things that are being investigated, or the things that they will be looking at essentially throughout the study. So first thing that you need to know, so actually we'll read sleep and then we can understand it better. So brainwave activity during sleep can be measured via an EEG. Do you know what an EEG is? I'll just show you one. This is what an EEG is. So these are called electrodes. This is called electrodes, okay? And it is attached from your brain to this machine. And in this machine, you can look at the waves, right? So it's like this. You can see all of these waves, and these waves are the basically what essentially are depicting a certain thing. So it's exactly like this, like they've shown us over here, right? So this is something that was used in the study to study sleep, and they'll be telling us how. Just switching my screen. Right. So they used an EEG which detects activity through electrodes connected to scalp. Sleep researchers have identified five distinct sleep stages. Stages 1 and 2 stages 1 and 2 are lighter stages of sleep where a person can still be woken fairly easily, and stages 3 and 4 are deeper stages of sleep. In the deeper stages, brain waves slow down and show pattern of high amplitude and low frequency, right? So there's four different stages that they're defining over here. They're saying 1 and 2 is basically, so they've said this essentially there's five different stages of sleep. Okay, 1 and 2 is light sleep. 2 and 3 is basically, they are 3 and 4, sorry, it's where they're in the deeper stages of sleep, and final stage is the deepest sleep that you could be in, and that's called REM sleep, which is the full form for rapid, which is the short form for rapid eye movement, right? So whenever I say REM sleep, that means rapid eye movement sleep. That means deep sleep, right? So you are in such deep sleep that your eyes are moving rapidly, like inside of your eyes, obviously eyes are shut, but inside of your eyes move rapidly, right? And that's REM sleep. And stages 1 to 4, which is again light sleep and normal deep sleep, that's called NREM sleep. Why is it called NREM? Because that means non rapid eye movement, right? So there's two
Mm-hmm.
types. major two types of sleep: REM sleep and REM sleep. REM sleep is deep, deep sleep, and REM sleep is not that deep sleep. So there's five different stages of sleep. Number fifth is REM sleep, and one to four is NREM. Clear?
Yes, miss.
Okay. When we fall asleep, right? So in our first few hours of the night, that's all NREM sleep because we're in very light sleep. When number four, stage one, stage two, stage three, then later in the later hours of the hours of the night, when we've been sleep, let's say the first half of the night, then is basically where our REM sleep actually starts happening, right? So that's what they're telling us over here. Then we have ultradian rhythms, right? Biological rhythms which repeat more frequently than once a day are called ultradian rhythms. The sleep stages are good examples as these. So essentially, when you're looking at the EEG, right, I just showed you how it shows the lines, right? And when you have the same pattern of lines, that's called an ultradian rhythm, right? So in an EEG, when you're getting the results and the pattern of lines remain the same, so let's say it's zigzag, zigzag, zigzag constantly, and it's remaining the same for days and days, that means you have an ultradian rhythm, which is seen as a very healthy thing. Then you have dreams, right? Now dreams is something that is different with each and every person. They are subjective, right? So I might be dreaming about one thing and you might be dreaming about completely something else, right? There is no possibility that we are dreaming about the same thing, right? So they will be trying, they wanted to study dreams. So imagine that's like something that they don't even know what it is, right? Dreams are completely subjective. You don't know whether you'll dream. You don't know if you dream how, what you're going to dream about, right? So the background was that they were interested in finding a reliable way to physiologically determine when a person is dreaming. So they wanted to see if it is possible to tell biologically, if there is a procedure that we can break through which we can biologically tell if a person is dreaming. So while a person is dreaming, we can just say, okay, yeah, now he's started to. Sorry, while a person is sleeping, we just look at them and we're like, okay, yeah, now they have started to dream. So they wanted to do something like that. They wanted to have something like that, that when they look at it and they're like, okay, yeah, the person's dreaming. Make sense?
Mm, yes, miss.
Right. Then we have previously Kleitman had noticed that when people were asleep who were showing rapid eye movements and woken up, they would recall their dreams. However, when woken up during other parts of the night, they found it very difficult to dream, etc., etc. So now what they're saying, they're telling us the dement and glypin in brief, right? Which I would want you to read, but before that I'll just tell you what essentially is gonna happen, because before you read that, you need to know that, right? So REM sleep is deep sleep, okay, and REM sleep, I'm giving you a spoiler, is also when people are dreaming. So as soon as someone goes into REM sleep, that means they have started dreaming, right? So there is a high chance that whenever you're in REM sleep, you are also dreaming. Whenever you're in NREM sleep, which is non-rapid eye movement sleep, which is not very deep sleep, there's a very very huge chance that you're not dreaming, right? You're not thinking, right? But when you're in REM sleep, that means yes, you are dreaming, and that is how you tell if a person's dreaming or not. That is exactly how Dement and Gleitman will be able to tell that okay, if a person has started dreaming or not. Now, I want you to read this Dement and Gleitman in brief. Um, Rather than me explaining it to you, right? Because this is just they're telling you about the study uh generally, and there's like three different names and everything, which I will get into when we do the procedure. But if you want to just go in over the brief, please go ahead.
Mm, Okay.
Okay. Um. Okay, they're telling us about longitudinal study. Again, can you just not this part? Okay, it's fine. You can just review that later on. I'm just gonna do the aims with you before I stop. Right, there were four main aims. Number one was they wanted to see if people will recall dreams that occur in REM or in non-REM sleep, right? So there is a possibility that there's also dreaming in NREM period, right? When there's light sleep, there is a possibility that you dream. However, what they wanted to see is if you will remember that dream. So let's say I'm in REM sleep and you wake me up, will I remember the dream? Okay, that's number one. Or if I'm in NREM sleep and you wake me up in the middle of it, will I remember the dream, right? So that's REM versus NREM. If there will be dream recall, which means will you remember the dream? That's number one thing that they wanted to see. Number two thing is to see if there's a link between the estimate of dream length and the length of REM period, right? So they wanted to see that how did let's say for the example the REM period was 30 minutes. Does that mean your dream was also 30 minutes? That is another connection that they wanted to see. So every single time a patient woke up, they would ask the patient that, how long were you dreaming for? 5 minutes or 15 minutes? Like, how long did it feel like, right? And they would also ask the patient to say their dream, right? So whatever the patient is telling, they count the words of it. So let's say a patient told a dream and that is like, let's say 700 words. So obviously they've probably been dreaming about for the last 30 minutes or so, right? So that is another thing that they wanted to see, that however much longer your REM period is, does that mean your dream length will also be that long, right? Number three is that they wanted to see if the eye movement pattern tells something about the dream. So for example, if your eye movement pattern is vertical, does that mean that you're looking at like dreaming about something that's also vertical, right? So they wanted to see if the eye movement pattern is showing is something related to the content of the dream. And the last one is to see if there's a positive correlation between the length of REM and the number of words given in the dream narrative. So, like I told you, they would ask them to narrate the dream, whatever dream that they've just had, they would ask them to say it out loud. And when the patient would say, when the participant would say it out loud, they would count the words of the whatever they've said, right? So they wanted to see if there's a positive correlation with the length of REM and this, right? So does that mean as long as the length of REM period would be, that is also how long the dream would be. That's the relationship that they wanted to see. That does that if the REM period is long, does that mean the words will also be more? So they wanted to see if there's a positive correlation over there. Make sense?
Yes, miss.
Okay, so I am going to stop here before it gets becomes a little um gibberish. So we've just got the study itself left, and then we're gonna, which we should be done with in the next class. So before you go, just one second.